Okay, just like that, we're live. So this is the second Q&A I'm hosting, and I have not been doing a very good job of promoting these. So I am really relying on the replays and the questions ahead of time that have been submitted. But if anyone joins live, I'm going to put a comment in to drop your questions in the chat. And I'm going to go ahead and start on some questions that were submitted ahead of time. So this is really interesting. I had a couple people submit questions that actually have the same answer, which is really fun. So I had somebody ask, what are your thoughts on cellulite? Is it a damp condition of the tissues? Any treatments you can suggest? And then someone else asked, hi, Lila, what do you think of lipomas? What herbs would you recommend to reduce them and get rid of them? Thank you. So if we are looking at both of these conditions, cellulite and lipomas, from an Ayurvedic perspective, the same assessments are going to come into play. So we'll start with lipomas. Lipomas are benign fatty masses, and in Western medicine, there are very few tools to address them. So mostly it comes to surgery, and then oftentimes they're surgically removed and they come back. The surgery doesn't actually address the underlying cause, and you'll probably hear something like they're genetic or they're just there, and that's just that. But when we see something like fatty lipomas from an energetic and Ayurvedic perspective, we are seeing something that shouldn't be there. Fatty lipomas are extra. They are extra masses, extra fat. It gives us information for how the body is or isn't in balance. So from an Ayurvedic lens, fatty lipomas involve the dosha kapha. So kapha dosha governs water metabolism in the body and structure. So it's the earth and water element, and it is really governing to make sure we have enough structure. But if we have too much structures in the body, then we have an excess of kapha. So anytime we're looking at something in Ayurveda, we are looking for, what is this person's imbalance? Is there too much of something? Is there too little of something? Or do we have the wrong kind of something? So those three questions can be asked in any disease state, any symptom, and it gives a plethora of information, which is really cool, because when you look at everything again from that energetic perspective, all you're doing is looking at the imbalance this person has. And when we look at diseases or symptoms like cellulite or lipomas, we're not looking at them from a Western lens where it's, this person has this, we will do that. We're still taking into account the individual and the uniqueness that is them. So Ayurveda goes past the doshas, or these elemental balances in the body, and we look at things like the quality of the tissues. And both of these cases involve the fat tissue. So meta dhatu in Ayurveda. So when we have healthy meta dhatu, we have elasticity, we have oily and pliable skin, we have supple joints that do not crack, we have a smooth voice, and we have vitality. So if we're looking at both of these conditions that are both involved in the same tissues and the same dosha, we could look at cellulite as an obstruction. So things are being blocked, things aren't flowing or circulating as they need to, and that is affecting the quality of the skin, the fat, the fluid, all of these things that kind of conjoin there that create the cellulite picture. If we're looking at the fatty lipomas, then we have an excess. There's too much of something happening that's causing issues in this person's body. So there's a couple things. I want to pull something up really quickly. So we are assessing, again, individuals and their balance. So lipomas are actually kind of tricky because they lie in the space that's between the internal world and the external world. So a lot of times you can either treat the external or the internal, but lipomas kind of lay in the middle. So they are a little harder to treat, but they are definitely really responsive to herbs and natural healing methods. So, after assessing the individual, what's unique to them, and all of these things, then we would look at okay, how do we bring this back into balance? So, I would approach it from kind of multiple lenses. So, first, I would say, how do we treat the excess kapha? So, that might be using things like diuretics and astringents. We're going to dry out the terrain, we're going to pull back sloppy tissues. We would, assess all of the pieces that we normally assess: diet, lifestyle, pattern, the emotional side of things, or is somebody clinging to something? Is there an excess in emotions? We would look at it all. But in the end, you're most likely going to use a class of herbs called lekana herbs, which are channel clearing herbs. And these are the herbs in Ayurveda that we use to scrape, to reduce, and to clear channels. So the lipomas would be in that channel, and these herbs would go through and help to clear everything out. Now, these herbs can be really potent. They're not herbs to be on long term. They're very depleting and detoxifying. And if there are other imbalances or competing patterns going on in the body, they have to be used with care. So they're definitely a class of herbs that are usually used under practitioner guidance. In addition to those lekana herbs, those channel clearing herbs, I would be, again, thinking of diuretics to help with the water metabolism situation and the excess dampness, and then astringents to pull in the tissues. And then again, whatever else is unique to the individual. What does that person need to come back into balance? So we can look at symptoms, we can look at common patterns that are associated with symptoms, but at the end of the day, how each person came to have fatty lipomas is probably going to be different. And there's other patterns that are going to be influencing it or that might need to be addressed in order to address that pattern. So you can do a little bit of symptom treatment targeting just, again, the specific fatty lipomas. And we can do the deeper root cause terrain work to bring everything back into balance. So when we're looking at the cellulite, it's going to have similar pieces involved. We have kapha dosha and we have metadhatu, which is the fat tissue. So kapha, I didn't say this earlier, but it governs structure, fluids, and fat. And all of these things are involved in cellulite. So again, we have to look at what's going on with this person's structure, what's going on with their fluid metabolism, what's going on with their fat picture. So if we are looking at cellulite specifically, we're probably most likely thinking about removing obstructions in the body. So that could still be using lekana herbs to clear channels so things can circulate and move freely. We would want to increase circulation, bringing more blood flow and nutrients to that area of the body. We would want to address any stagnation that's happening in the body. So that might be making sure that our detox systems are open, making sure that our lymphatic system is draining and moving, and we're not having obstructions being created. We would want to remove obstructions and then increase circulation. And then again, we're still going to want to look at that damp, heavy picture. So we might be working on water metabolism. We might be working at tissues to support metabolism to make sure things are. There's a concept in Ayurveda, Agni, right? We have to be able to have enough heat in the body to take nutrients or to take food and transform it into nutrients. So we would be looking at making sure that our body is able to do this in multiple different places. Because if we're not, and we're not breaking down food properly, or we're not breaking down certain substances properly, that can lead to obstruction and buildup and excess waste. So we wouldn't just look at the symptom in isolation. We would look at who has the symptom and how did they get here. That's a really big piece of the puzzle. And then we would look at what does this person need to come back into balance in order to address this issue. So looking at all these pieces, the qualities, again, what do we have too much of? What do we have too little of? What is the wrong kind? So that's a little just cheat sheet for assessing any symptom or imbalance in the body, which is really, really cool. So I know there's a lot of Ayurvedic terms sprinkled in there. Just a quick summary: lipomas usually going to be kapha excess, so too much earth, too much water happening in the body, and then it's going to involve that metadhatu or that fat tissue in the body, and we're going to have too much of that. So we're going to have to do the things to reduce that in the body. Again, lipomas are a little tricky because of where they lay in the body between the external and the internal, but they are very responsive to herbs and natural healing methods. Same with cellulite. Cellulite's going to be the same picture. We're going to look at that fat tissue. We're going to look at kapha. We're going to look at stagnation in the body and what does this person need to get things moving, to make sure that we have enough of the right tissues, to make sure that the quality of these tissues is good, to make sure that nutrients that needs to be brought to them is happening and we're having enough circulation in the body, not to create this obstructive picture that's causing everything to stagnate and be just stuck, right? And that's where we have a lot of waste buildup that leads to a picture like this. So for both of these, I would think of channel clearing herbs, herbs to clear the gunk. And then I would also be thinking of, depending on the person, astringents, diuretic, circulatory herbs, and I would just take the picture from there. So that was a mouthful. Another question I got asked, Denise is giving me lots of good questions to respond to today. And this one's a little bit more esoteric. So give me a second while I pull it up. Okay. In spiritual circles, there is a thought that if you like certain foods or gravitate towards a certain country's food, that chances are your soul has spent time there. It's like a memory. It got me wondering if people that live in areas where Chinese herbs or Ayurvedic herbs are not located, that it would be more beneficial to use herbs that use herbs from the place that person's soul is from. Any thoughts? That's a really interesting question, and that's not something that I've actually thought about before. But it reminds me, I did a call yesterday with a client, and he asked me if I use local herbs, if I use herbs that are local to my terrain. So I'm in Southern Oregon, and he asked me if I source local herbs, and I told him I don't. I don't use a lot of Western or local herbs, because when I'm looking and working with a person, my goal is to use the herbs that are going to be best fitted to the case. And that to me isn't always local herbs or Western herbs, even though those are in theory the most accessible to us, the closest that things that grow to us. So that kind of got me thinking. It's a little bit of a separate topic, but feels about in alignment with this question. And I will say for myself, I definitely feel like I have a soul connection or kinship to Ayurveda. I mean, I remember just learning about the system and it just like, I feel like I'm home and it brings tears to my eyes. And there's just a really deep soul alignment to me in the system. And so I naturally gravitate towards more of the Ayurvedic herbs than, say, Western herbs or Chinese herbs. I still use Western herbs and Chinese herbs for myself, but overall, I have this, again, connection to the Ayurvedic herbs. They excite me. I understand them better, like just quicker without as much work that it takes for me to understand the Chinese herbs or the Western herbs. And so for myself, I definitely tend towards the Ayurvedic paradigm, and I might even tend towards that with other people I'm working with, because Ayurveda, again, feels like my affinity out of the three systems, even though I pull from each one. But it's interesting because certain people come to me and for whatever reason, their pattern just presents really clearly in one of the three systems. Maybe it's a Western lens, maybe it's a traditional Chinese medicine lens, maybe it's an Ayurvedic lens. And then I will pull tools from that system because for whatever reason, again, their symptom picture, just who they are, their essence, their aura, I don't know what I'm picking up on, but something is really connecting me or connecting them to one system specifically, and that's what I'll pull from. So this also makes me think though, and I really I don't know, I'm going on a spiritual tangent here. Like, how much should we cater to what happens in past lives or past iterations, or how much we should pay attention to where we are now and here? Maybe it would be more appropriate for me to ignore my Ayurvedic kinship and use Western herbs because that's where I'm at on this planet. But I also think we're living in a time where we have the luxury and the benefit and just the opportunity to kind of get the best of both worlds, because it's so easy to get herbs from India or herbs from China or herbs from Europe. And so that's a really good question, and I don't have a straight answer, but for me being in practice, again, if somebody presents clearer in one of the three systems, that's what I will go with. And a lot of times I'm combining from each of the systems, but I think there's definitely something to ponder there. Yeah, it's given me a lot to think about. Thank you, Denise, for that question. I bet you might have a good answer. I might poke your brain on it later. Um, Let me see. The other question I wanted to answer, and this is something I see come up a lot, is people searching for natural healing practitioners. And I think that there's a lot of overwhelm and confusion about who does what, where should I go, what's the difference between an herbalist, a naturopath, and a functional medicine doctor. There's so many subsets of nutrition. We have nutritionists, we have dietitians. Um, we have health coaches. There's just a lot of people doing a lot of things in the health and healing space. And I remember going to coffee with, it was a physical therapist, me, the clinical herbalist who also does nutrition, and a chiropractor, and there's someone else there. Oh, and a naturopath. And every one of them says, I treat complex digestive issues. And it's so funny because I was like, the physical therapist, the chiropractor, and the naturopath, and me all think that we treat the same things. And I think that each system has strengths and weaknesses. I think each system has things that it's better at and more suited to do. And I definitely wouldn't naturally think of physical therapy for digestion or even chiropractic adjustments for digestion. But at the same time, if somebody's so locked in and their nervous system's so out of whack, like giving them safety in the body could definitely lead to better digestion because they're not in this anxious, balled up, tight fight or flight state. So I think it's really important to work with practitioners that you like and know and trust and are competent. And it's really important to understand some of the, I think, pros and cons and limitations of each of the systems. So I'll give a quick rundown of the differences between a clinical herbalist, a naturopath, and a functional medicine doctor to start. And then, I kind of think that it takes a village with any healing scenario. So I think I get to sit in a very unique space because I think the clinical herbalist kind of gets to hold it all, in my opinion. We get to really just see this bird's eye view and picture of what people are going on. And we look at so many facets of a person, be it their lifestyle, their diet, their relationships. We look at, some of us look at the spiritual aspect. So we kind of get to be at this place where everything converges. And we refer out for what we can't do. So I often refer out for people to go get body work done or things like that. There are definitely limitations and things that I can't do. And bringing in other resources is really helpful for people's healing journey. So naturopaths are not clinical herbalists. They're not trained to any depth in using plants as medicine, whereas a clinical herbalist specializes in using plants as medicine. They might use supplements, they might use nutrition or other therapies, but like at their core is the plants. So naturopaths are trained in 17 different modalities, and they're not trained in a lot of depth in each of the modalities. So they have a lot of tools in their toolbox, but they don't excel at any one of these tools unless they kind of go out of the naturopathic education and paradigm and specialize or learn more. Because there's definitely naturopaths that have gone to extra schooling or done extra education to become proficient in things like herbalism. But the standard naturopath is not an expert in herbalism. The herbal education they get is actually very on the light side. And then the other thing is most naturopaths, depending on what state they're on and what their licensure allows them to do, can prescribe medication. So they get to work in both worlds. They get to pull from the Western paradigm and this natural paradigm. But they aren't necessarily taught the same energetics or assessment tools that we are taught in herbalism. So when I pull from Ayurveda or I pull from traditional Chinese medicine, I have complete systems that help me analyze symptom pictures and address imbalances from a lens that's outside of the Western medical model. Most naturopaths kind of treat to lab work or treat to symptoms or treat to the condition, not necessarily this whole holistic view that other systems might bring in. And I've looked into this in quite a bit of depth because I almost went the naturopathic route, but something in me felt that wasn't in alignment and I wasn't going to learn what I needed to learn. And then I found my mentor and went this other route, which I feel very in alignment with. And I think there's, again, pros and cons and limitations to both. But if you want plants predominantly, the clinical herbalist is where you want to go. If you want somebody who can walk in both worlds and prescribe medication and trying to do things naturally, a naturopath might be a better fit, but knowing that their natural tools aren't going to be as potent as someone like the clinical herbalist. And then there's the functional medicine doctors. I actually really love the principles of functional medicine. It's all about root cause healing, what's happening in a person's terrain that we need to address, that we need to bring into balance in order to help this individual in front of me. The concepts of functional medicine go back, I think the term was coined in the 1980s by a doctor. And if you're a good herbalist, you are following functional medicine practices and philosophies. The philosophy is great. How it's being executed in modern healthcare is not as great, though. Functional medicine doctors, what I see happening in practice is they're, again, kind of stuck in that Western paradigm of treating to the labs, treating to the disease, or treating to the symptom, not looking at everything in a holistic view. So instead of, looking at all of the things that someone like myself or another clinical herbalist would look at, they see, oh, this person has low ferritin. We're going to give them this supplement that's this ferritin complex, and that's what we're going to do. Oh, they have their liver enzymes are up on their lab work. We're going to give them this liver supplement. So what I see happening is functional medicine's gotten really popular, and people are definitely paying an arm and a leg to go see functional medicine doctors. And then they are getting recommended big old supplement list of these very expensive, very complex, overformulated supplement formulas. So you're going to get a ton of supplements, and they're all going to have a ton of ingredients, and maybe they're going to be herb extracts, maybe it's going to be nutraceuticals, and we're getting, vitamins, minerals, and other plant things that aren't necessarily plant extracts, but we're taking single constituents from a plant. Like I'm thinking about things like resveratrol or quercetin, and we are giving a lot of that. So functional medicine doctors use the same principles as what I believe in. I am trained in functional nutrition, looking at the whole individual, the terrain, the root cause. Everything's very specific to what's going on and who's sitting in front of you. But the way it's actually being executed in practice, really, I think it's gotten stuck in the Western paradigm still. We're treating things in a way that's not very balanced or holistic. So that's a little bit of a challenging one. I'm not the biggest fan of the nutraceuticals or a lot of the supplements that practitioners are using. I think they're very expensive. I think they're very overpriced. Well, that's the same as expensive, but they're over formulated for what they are. And they're so complex and there's so many things in them. You don't know what's doing what, and you don't know really if it's effective. So you're paying for all of these things that it's really hard to isolate, again, how it's all working together. And they're using a lot of plant medicine and plant extracts in these formulas, and I think that's a problem and a rant I'll save for another day, but I think it's leading to a lot of over-harvesting and misuse of plants. We don't need to throw ashwagandha in everything because ashwagandha is popular, and we don't need to throw the wrong parts of ashwagandha in everything because ashwagandha is popular. So I see that happening a lot in the space, and just if you're ever looking for a practitioner and you're wondering, I don't know who to see, I don't know if I should see chiropractor or acupuncture or functional nutrition or functional medicine or naturopath or herbalist, I think one, find somebody you resonate with, but two, make sure whoever you're seeing is non-dogmatic, because anyone who says that their way is the only way is not a person you want to work with, because that is not the truth. There are so many entry points, so many different ways to approach something. And I think that we need to be open, and what might work for one person at one point in their journey might not work for another at another point in their journey. Denise, I have a friend that found out she has very low levels of estrogen and testosterone. She has low libido, irritability, and fatigue. Any thoughts on guidance of what might be causing it from Chinese or Ayurvedic perspective? Two things come to mind really quickly. Anytime I see irritability, I think about our liver. The liver is a very hot organ, and when it gets overheated, we get reactive. So anytime there's frustration or anger or irritability, I think of the liver. And the liver definitely plays a big role in the entire hormonal cascade, which is really complicated. But when I'm looking at low levels of estrogen and testosterone, the other thing I would want to check is, what's their cholesterol look like? Are they on something like a statin? Because those hormones are made from cholesterol. And if we don't have enough of good cholesterol, good building blocks in our body cannot make those hormones. So I see this happening. People have their hormones out of whack, but they're also on a statin that's lowering the levels of cholesterol in their body. And there's just not enough matter to make the hormones. So that's not necessarily a Chinese or an Ayurvedic perspective, but it's something I'm seeing a lot in practice, where cholesterol levels are getting too low, lower than I'd like to see them for optimal functioning of the systems in our body, like hormones. So the other thing that happens, low libido, fatigue, hormones, talking about cholesterol as a building block, like we might not have enough just nutrients, vitality, ojas is what we call it in Ayurveda, life force. And that might need to get rebuilt up. We might need to rebuild the reserves in that person in order for them to be able to create what they need to create in the body. So when we have hormonal issues, hormones have to be signaled to be created. They have to be created. They have to be transported. They have to be utilized, and then they have to be eliminated from the body. So we could have issues at any one of these points. There's a lot of different fail points for hormones. And so the best thing to do is look at the entire picture and the balance and where this person is having challenges. Like I said, a picture like this, the two things that come to mind are depletion and liver congestion, which is actually one of the most common patterns I see in practice. People come and they are depleted. They don't have enough nutrients or energy reserves or just like this vital life force, but they also have too much burden, like the burden is too high on their body, and we have like this buildup of toxins because our livers are overburdened, our elimination and pathways aren't up to snuff and doing what they need to do. And when we try to rebuild them, we add to the overburdened picture. And then when we try to detox them and fix the overburdened piece, we deplete them further. So it's like this crossroads that I'm seeing a lot of people come to me at. It's a really common pattern. We're overfed but undernourished in our society, where we get enough calories, we get enough macronutrients, we have plenty of protein and carbs and fat, but what we don't have is enough nutrients. So the places I like to start are assessing nutrient status and getting people's just nutrients dialed in to make sure they have the building blocks to do what they need to do. And then it's a bit of a stair step into, do we detox this person or do we build them? Do we do both simultaneously? that's really person individual. But I think the liver and just an overall depletion is always involved in a lot of different cases. Those were super, super, really good questions, and I appreciate them, and I appreciate you, Denise. And for anyone catching the replay, I should have this out very soon. Um, yeah, it's a really interesting connection. Not knowing the cholesterol affects hormones, and the number one prescribed medication in the country, I believe, is statins, which is to drive down everybody's cholesterol levels. And we've really demonized cholesterol, but it is actually such an important building block, not just for our hormones, but for our brain health, for inflammation, for all kinds of things in the body. So it's a bit of a conundrum I think we've created for ourselves, to just the way we're, treating the symptom and not the underlying root cause. Okay, well, that is all of our time for today, but I will be here in 2 weeks again for questions, and really appreciate you all listening and submitting questions ahead of time. I think it's really fun to answer your questions, and these were some really good ones. So thank you, and we'll see you next time.